Now, as our distinguished panel takes their leave, it is my pleasure to introduce you to the rumble in the urban jungle, the debate we're all waiting for. There will be blood. From your radio and now in your face, please welcome David Gray. Good, thanks.
Is this mic on? Hello? Hello. I'm going to put on a different microphone in just a moment. I'm David Gray. I'm the host of the Calgary Eye Opener on CBC Radio 1. This is what I look like. Nice to meet you all. How's everybody feeling? Do you want to, just while we're putting mics on, why don't you stand up and shake for a second or do something strange just to let the blood flow for a minute, okay? Because you've been sitting very, very quietly for quite a while now. So. Stretch it out. Do what you need to do. Okay. Okay.
Where do you want to sit?
I don't know, what side do you want?
Leave the middle seat open.
I'll sit here. Okay. This is the side that you know.
All right. Okay, that's enough of that. Please be seated. Giving you too much freedom already, clearly. People getting coffee and sweets and stuff. All right, I'm just going to start talking. Please feel free to make your way back to your seats when, as soon as you get your coffee. After a day of what I'm told has been healthy dialogue and professional team building or whatever you've been doing in here, it's my job to help throw a spanner into the whole works. The next hour is designed to be a debate. Really what I expect we'll talk about is how decisions are made in this city and if Calgary really is making the most healthy decisions moving forward. And you will have an opportunity to ask questions from the floor in a little bit. Now, here for your listening pleasure is Joe Arvai.
Hi.
Hi, Joe. Joe holds the University of Calgary SFAR Chair in Applied Decision Research. Over there, that guy, that's Roland Stanley. He's the City of Calgary General Manager of Planning, Development, and Assessment. That's what it says on his business card. Now, a while ago, Joe wrote a little piece for the Globe and Mail, which is a daily newspaper in Canada. Some of you may have heard about it. It was called "This Canadian City Could Be the Next Detroit." Guess which city he meant? That's right. It wasn't Calgary, Paris of the prairies. It wasn't Calgary, Rome of the Rockies. It was Calgary, Detroit of the Dust Bowl. Innocent enough, really. Joe's a former Michigan resident who now lives in Calgary and teaches in the University of Calgary's Geography Department. At the heart of Joe's argument, in case you didn't read it, was that escalating property values and urban sprawl and a one-horse industry base and a sudden decline in economic fortunes all contributed to Detroit's demise and helped it fall into a bankrupt, violent urban wasteland. Keep in mind, he wrote this about Calgary, a city with the young Canadians, a city with an economic development slogan that reads, "Be part of the energy." And the daily newspaper for a long time has banned the words urban sprawl from the editorial pages. But I digress. Suffice it to say, Calgary is not a city that easily acknowledges its shadow. Now, lost in the howls of protest following his article was Joe's claim that he was not in any way trying to be prophetic. He was just trying to stimulate conversation. Did it work? Imagine, if you will, if you're the newly hired Wonder Boy city planner arriving here, and this article happens to fall on your desk. You've worked in the States, you've worked all over, your pedigree alone is enough to silence most naysayers, and then this comes along. What would you say? Let's find out, shall we? We're going to start with Joe. Joe, why did you write this article?
Well, first, thanks, David, for being here, and thanks, everyone, for coming out. This is actually the largest crowd I've ever spoken to. I kind of want to take my camera out and take a picture of you all to prove to my mom and dad that I was actually here. First, the piece in the Globe, the original title, which the Globe and Mail suggested, was "This Canadian City Will Be the Next Detroit." And I asked them to change it to "Could Be," because I really did want to have a conversation. I didn't want to be killed in the city. Look, what had happened was I had just come out of a meeting where we were talking about the coal industry in Australia. Why would you talk about the coal industry in Australia? Australia was ramping up coal production at levels that the country had never seen before. They had built a ton of infrastructure. Companies were getting rich. All of the coal was going to China. Then one day, the Chinese decided that that was going to be the end of coal, and overnight shut down the Australian coal industry and devastated the country's economy and really crippled a lot of cities. Around the same time, I was reading about increased distance amongst the different classes of people that live in Calgary. I was looking at property values going ridiculously high, through the roof. Even a simple fixer-upper north of $500,000, which seems obscene to me. And I started to wonder what would happen if all of the rhetoric about oil and gas going to China came true, and we built a bunch of infrastructure, we all got really wealthy, we all increased our standard of living, got really expensive homes, and then what if one day that just stopped? What would happen? I think rich people, the people who could move, would move. People who'd be left behind are, in David's words, the stickers, not the boomers. And while I don't think that we would be the what'd you call it, the wasteland of the Dust Bowl or something, I think it could be really problematic and really quite scary. And frankly, I came here because I wanted to be here, and it scared the crap out of me. So I sat down at my laptop and wrote the piece.
Roland Stanley, what did you think when you read the article?
I was glad he wrote it, because now people hate somebody else. The clicker here?
You want a clicker?
The clicker that makes the...
Roland brought visual aids.
Is this the thing that makes the PowerPoint go?
You're blocking them from me.
Oh. So I was actually glad he wrote it, because it made other people, like the home builders, think somebody else had something wrong to say. Is it on, my PowerPoint? Hey, it is. Okay, that's not going, that's not going.
It's the middle button.
The middle, there. Oh, we don't want that one. Is there sound? We need sound. So that's where I used to work, on the left. That was the Jewish shopping neighborhood of St. Louis 50 years ago. By the way, those buildings there, here. I'll sell that to you for $800. In fact, I'll also give you 15 years of tax abatement. And I'll give you federal, state, and historic tax credits that'll offset your restoration costs by 37%. But you won't do it. Do we have sound? Because the video I want... Okay, go back to the PowerPoint, please. I know I didn't have that in my PowerPoint.
Fun times in Cleveland again. Still Cleveland. Cool down to Cleveland town, everyone. Under construction since 1868. See our river that catches on fire. So polluted that all our fish have AIDS. See the sun almost 3 times a year. This guy has at least 2 DUIs. The flats look like a Scooby-Doo ghost town. Don't slow down in East Cleveland or you'll die. Our economy's based on LeBron James. Buy a house for the price of a VCR. Our main export is crippling depression. We're so retarded that we think this is art. It could be worse, though at least we're not Detroit. We're not Detroit.
So,
Did we buy that song to use? Or?
I got to tell you, when that came out about 4 years ago and I was still in St. Louis, I said, thank God they did it about Cleveland. So that's where I worked for 6 years. And when I first saw Joe's article, I said, I love it when academics do this because I get to rip them to pieces. And because this is what used to happen in St. Louis all the time. There was some guy who, like in his pajamas in a basement in Kansas City, used to write about how we were the worst crime city in the world, in America. And we'd, of course, every year you'd be trying to get businesses to come to town. This academic would write this argument. He's like, God damn it. You know, because the next time you're talking to a business, well, we read this article. And then we had dinner the other night, and I realized what he was trying to say. And I'm going to put it to you. Hold it. You took it off again. We actually prefer to have the video up. By the way, this is the smallest crowd I've ever spoken to. So, yesterday I was speaking to 300 people at the ULI spring event in Vancouver, Urban Land Institute, who control 85% of the rental housing market in the United States. And I want to get them over here. But I actually think we should be more like Detroit. Who knows Zach Past or something or other?
Zach Pashik.
Okay. He makes those bikes. And those watches, Shinola watches, are made in a factory in Detroit. And I hope we can be more like Detroit.
All right.
Can I say something to that?
I think you should. Yeah.
I mean, I think, you know, I think that there's a lot of opportunities that have emerged in Detroit. This is I brought a prop too. It's a book called Detroit City is the Place to Be. And it's not a post-mortem on why things went pear-shaped in Detroit. It's about all the stuff that's happening in Detroit since it went pear-shaped. And the reason that they make Shinola watches and the reason that they make Detroit bikes and the reason that they have all these kind of great hipster businesses is because of what Roland said. You can buy a storefront for $400 and get a big tax credit. The people who make the watches are out-of-work auto workers. The people who make the wallets at Shinola are out-of-work people who made the upholstered seats in cars. So I would like to be more like Detroit too. I just don't want it to be because we're surviving or trying to survive a financial calamity. I want it to be done on our own. I want diversity, and I want it now. I want smaller cities, and I want a smaller city, or at least a smaller feeling city, and I want that now. I don't want it in 10 years.
And to that point, so I sit on the Calgary Economic Development Board. And in the opening, David mentioned be part of the energy.
Be part of the energy. You have to say it that way.
Oh. Hey, our logo is be part of the energy. I think it needs to be something else. And I think if Calgary wants to go in the right direction, we have to start fostering these other things. And we can learn from Detroit, trust me. We can learn from Detroit if we're going to diversify and avoid some of the challenges that these cities like. By the way, where I worked in St. Louis, lost the greatest percentage of population of any city in the United States. Detroit lost more people, but not as a percentage of the population. We lost 65% of the people. 514,000 people left in 40 years. 65% of the businesses. And to Joe's point, those things actually happen. Now, one of the great things that's happening here is the high-rise condos. When you get so many investors in one building, that helps, but we've got to diversify.
All right. I think at the core of all this, of have we built a sustainable city, and are we making healthy decisions now to make a sustainable city in the future? Am I missing something? Is that where we're going with this?
Funny you should ask.
Well, before you get your chance, the gentleman beside me may want to talk about that, because you know how to make, you're about making decisions, aren't you, Joe?
So I hear. You know, I think there's so many things that are happening, and I want to sort of capitalize on all the goodwill that I've heard in the room since I arrived. But the fact of the matter is, I think that when it comes to a lot of the decisions that get made, we are kind of falling short, and it's not that we're falling short because we're not working hard. Can I read something? So this was an email I got after the Detroit piece came out, and it's one of the nicer ones I got, so I'm going to read it. Dear Professor Arva, I read your piece in the Globe and Mail this morning. Honestly, I found it to be horrible. Comparing Calgary to Detroit now or in the future is downright unsubstantiated in so many ways. It is barely worth refuting. And for those of us who have worked tirelessly to make this city great, it is insulting. Good decision making is not necessarily related to how hard you work. I have no doubt that people are working hard. I have no doubt that people have civic pride. I spent a lot of time in Detroit. I would love going to the DIA to see the artwork, which they're now selling to keep the city afloat. It's not about hard work. It's about smart choices. It's about knowing what we want to achieve, knowing how to get there, looking at a range of alternatives, and making some tough trade-offs. Roland just mentioned be part of the energy. David mentioned it too. I got to confess, I'll jump in. I think it's kind of a silly title. But on the other hand, why not start there? You know, people love talking about it. I was just at an event the other day where the president of the University of Calgary talked about how Calgary was the energy capital of Canada. Calgary is the oil and gas capital of Canada. Calgary can be the energy capital of Canada, but it's going to require serious diversity and investment. The companies in this city that know that it's adapt or die, those are the ones who are pushing investment in other kinds of energy sources. And they're going to succeed. I really believe that. Others are putting their heads in the sand, and they are going to lead us down a path that I think is quite risky.
All right, let's focus that for a minute. You're flipping through your charts, which always makes me nervous.
I'm ready.
All right, let's focus on it. Let's talk about industry and their role in making healthy decisions in the city. Roland, is industry helping make healthy decisions about the future in the city?
You got a chart for that?
I do. You may not. Oh, sorry. You may not remember, but I think
put
it
that
was.
down, Robin.
I think it was. I did. I think it was December of 12, and I had done a speech to Civic Camp that had been paid for to be transcribed by the home builders, and they were taking snippets out of it, out of context, to use against me. And did anybody read that letter that Homes by Avi paid, I don't know, $20,000 against me? And do you know what? And they put it in the Herald. I was reading the paper one day, and it was a Saturday paper. And I flipped it over, and I'm reading articles. I went right over it. I didn't even see it. And then I started getting calls from some council members. Have you seen the article? I said, no. And it was an open letter to me, trashing me for comparing us to Detroit, which I didn't really do, but they said I did. And so when I started to talk about that stuff at the Civic Camp, I started to talk about diversifying, and is industry making the right decisions? Who's ever read this book, Biomimicry? Oh, I see some hands. By Janine Benes? Not Elaine Benes from Seinfeld, but Janine Benes. You know, if she was here today, she would have cost like $35,000 or $50,000 to speak.
That's what I cost.
That's what he cost. And she writes a book about how places got to think more like nature does. And when I think about be part of the energy, I think, then why aren't we the hub of alternative energy research? Why is an industry investing in that to try and create this city as an alternative? Because, you know, when you're in the United States, the three media outlets that count are the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. And none of them like us. Because of the Keystone Pipeline and the oil. And the only good, the Wall Street Journal loves us, the other two don't. And actually the Peace Bridge was in the Wall Street Journal once. And so the key is, can we diversify our image to make us more sustainable and sell this city as an energy capital, but not a one-dimensional energy capital?
All right, I got to move in the middle here because I don't think we're getting at it.
Can I say something to that?
Yeah,
Can I
please do.
respond to that? So, I mean, I think there's a point there to be made, and there are two elements to that. One is the decision-making element, and that's kind of the pulling of the levers and making the hard choices, which is something that I think we're totally capable of doing. It was one of the things that attracted me here in the first place. This is a very young, intelligent, motivated city with a real frontier, some would say FU attitude, which I think is fantastic. There's another element of it that's a kind of a psychological element. In decision science parlance, you call that a halo effect. It's where elements of an alternative or some sort of stimulus, a city for instance, kind of spill over and affect other unrelated elements of that same stimulus. And that's where we're also falling short. People look at Calgary and they sort of have an opinion of us before they even get to know us. And I think that if we really want to sort of make some hay in terms of doing something that's really innovative for this city, we need to we need to make the hard choices, obviously, but we need to start doing a better job of sort of dissuading others about what that image of us is. Oil and gas, I think, is a big deal in this city. I'm not going to say that it's not. I'm not going to say that it's a bad idea. I mean, obviously, it's working for the time being. But we need to find ways to sort of attract people to Calgary and get people attracted to Calgary because of other stuff. And that's going to be a sell, and it's something that, again, we're capable of doing, but I just don't feel like we're quite there yet.
What do you make of that?
It's absolutely true.
Yes?
This is a crappy debate.
So, it's absolutely true. But let me roll it back a bit to make the debate less crappy.
Thank you.
There is no way we can become Detroit. It's impossible. It just can't happen. It can't.
Could you throw a because in there? Just to,
I was just letting that rest for a moment.
yeah.
One, there is only 4 places in Canada over 1 million people. When you know, I used to laugh. I was in St. Louis, and we had the University of Toronto students come down. We're driving them through the north side, and they're going, "My God, how could they let this happen?" And I just about started laughing. You know, if it wasn't so sad and the naivety. When you move to the United States and you want to live in a city, you got 50 to 100 choices. I think there's 40 cities or 35 cities over 1 million people. How many are there in Canada? 4, and one you ain't going to because you don't speak French. And so we can't become that way. And plus, you'd have to like the Montreal Canadiens, and nobody does. We can't become that way because there's too many. There's only 3 cities. And so if you're coming here, you're going to come here. You're going to come here, Vancouver, or Toronto. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get hurt, but we can't become Detroit.
What makes
But wait,
you
we
so
don't have to become
Go.
Detroit. Sorry, you know what? This is a. I think we're focusing too much on the Detroit comparison, and I know that I wrote the piece.
Yeah,
so
whose fault is that?
I apologize for that. But we don't have to become Detroit. I mean, how many of you have been to Detroit? So a few of you. I mean, if you've been there, I mean, it's truly messed up in places. They film movies in Detroit because Detroit will let you blow up municipal buildings on film. In fact, they just tried to blow up another building for Batman versus Superman, and finally Detroit said, no, we're not letting you do that, so they're going to blow it up in Chicago instead. The point is, you don't need to become Detroit to have that level of blight to really mess up a city. You know, we don't have a couple of million people. Detroit went from 2 million people to just over 700,000 in a few years. That's a staggering decrease in the population. The people who moved weren't the people who moved because they were out of work and decided to sort of take a risk elsewhere. Those people still live in Detroit, and they're not taking risks elsewhere. They're trying to take them in Detroit. The people who move were the wealthy people. So to say that we can't become Detroit because we don't have a white flight problem, which I think is kind of racist, to be honest with you, because we don't have the same kind of tax structure, because all this other stuff that we don't have that Detroit did, we don't need that to get. I was going to say a bad word, and I'm not going to. We don't need that to get truly messed up. So I think this whole we're never going to become Detroit thing, yes, true, let's move on. But we are teetering on the edge of something that may not hit us this year or next year or even 10 years from now, but if we're not careful, of all the cities in Canada that it could hit, it's going to hit this one.
Now the challenge, and if you really want to know about Detroit, Michael Moore is sitting right there with the cap on.
What?
Who wrote the big Bowling for Columbine and did the whole thing in Detroit and talked about how the 8-year-old boy was in class and pulled out a gun and shot the little girl next to her, and how his mother had to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, just like the gentleman next to me, and take a shuttle bus to the suburbs to the job in the mall, because there were no jobs for her in the city. And so she wasn't there when the little boy got up in the morning. And so these are true stories, but you want to know what the hardest thing was for us in St. Louis? It wasn't the white flight. It was the black flight. And the inner city African Americans didn't want to live anymore in the homes that they grew up in. And so our challenge was to attract back the African American population who had the means to leave. And that was our biggest challenge.
Let's come back to Calgary. White flight here means people moving back to Saskatchewan. So,
Actually, it can mean people moving further out in the burbs or to Airdrie.
let's talk about, I want to get into how we make decisions here. Are we making decisions designed to make this a better urban city, the dream you keep talking about, and shown in some of the pictures in your chart about the better places to live? Or are we just making this a city that's kind of the way we've been making this city over the last 20, 25 years, is build a new neighborhood when we need one?
Funny you should ask that. Both. Because both are needed. Because in reality, now this is what really got me to trouble with the home builders. I stood up at their annual dinner while they were being told how to eat lobster, and I said, "You're not building to the market." And boy, they didn't like that. In fact, we had a big consulting firm come in after the flood, and they came to the same conclusion. It's an artificial market. We're building what people know. Boom, 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 boom. And there is a demand for it, but not the demand that people think there is, because there isn't the alternative. So that is still happening. But on the good side is we're doing a lot of other things. We're seeing this now reversal. The tide is slowing down, and more people are building on the inner city. And to Joe's point, to take a slightly different tact on it, the real crisis, I think, for us is 20 years from now and whether we can afford to build what we build. And so when we think about the Detroit syndrome, it's can we afford what we've built? So my analogy is, here's the condo with 150 units in it, okay? It sits on 200 feet of frontage. When you look at how much infrastructure serves that underneath the 200 feet, you're talking about 200 feet of water line, 200 feet of sewer line. Now drop those 150 units down on their side and give them 50 feet of frontage. Now you have 2 miles. And the challenge is, in places like Chestermere, which have no commercial tax base, and will they want to be annexed by us in 20 years when they have to start replacing that infrastructure? Because, folks,
Flip it.
this is how much farmland gets assessed at. That's how much retail, single-family detached. That's mixed-use high-rise buildings. They are a cash cow for the city. And those are the buildings that are on the 200 feet of frontage. These are the ones that are on the 50 feet of frontage. And that infrastructure we built has got to be replaced eventually. And we have to have the tax base to do it. That's our real challenge.
Want to kick in?
I don't even know what he said.
You know what? I think Rollins right. I mean, I think why do we keep saying that? Rollins wrong. Rollin makes some very good points. There are cash cows out there, and we can look at it from the perspective of how are we going to get our tax base up? I think the Chestermere point is a very valuable one. It's kind of the reverse Detroit scenario where you don't have the tax base in place to support decaying infrastructure, to support your needs in the future, especially if there's an economic downturn. I think, though, that what we're getting into, and I've sort of picked this up a little bit in some of the other conversations, not so much here, but other places I've been, is that when you make decisions about development, when you make decisions about anything for that matter, it's not a single objective problem. It's not an economic problem. It's not a social problem. It's not an environmental problem. It's all of those problems all at the same time. You've got to be satisfying multiple objectives at the same time. So when I hear developers in the city, when I hear the city, when I hear other cities talk about what they want to achieve with smart growth or sustainable growth or whatever, I think that sounds really good, but from a decision-making standpoint, it's not very meaningful. Because I could ask you, I mean, who in here who wants a sustainable city? Of course. How do you measure sustainability? How do you measure sustainability? How do you measure sustainability? If we don't agree on how we're going to measure that, if we don't agree on how we're going to measure human health or human well-being or environmental health, if we can't agree on that, we can't compare alternatives. If we can't compare alternatives, we're not compelled to think about alternatives. If we're not compelled to think about alternatives, we're left with ultimatums. Ultimatums aren't decisions. So I think that there's this real progression of how we need to start rethinking the way in which we go about our decision making. I heard engagement a lot today. Engagement usually means I have a plan. I'm going to tell you what my plan is. I'm going to let you tell me how you like my plan, and then I'm going to implement my plan whether you like it or not. That's not decision making, and frankly, that's not even engagement. So I think that if we really want to do something, we've got to come together as a community, Roland and I, David, all of you, and really start putting the pedal to the metal on really changing the way that we make choices. I can help with that. I do it for a living.
So how many of you live in a new community? No, don't be shy. Come on. You went like this. Like, you don't want to go like this so everybody can identify. How many of you live in a new community? How many of you live in Chestermere? Whoa. How many in Airdrie? How many in a neighborhood that is named after a tree that no longer exists in that neighborhood? Okay, there we go. So, you, sir, how long does it take you to get here today? 35 minutes. And did you see the letter to the editor in the, what's that paper called here again? The Herald. I don't know why we're doing bike tracks. Is anybody asking the suburbanites about what it means so they can drive downtown? Well, I don't. Should I care? Should I care how long it takes you to get downtown? You decided to live out there. How many expressways go into downtown Toronto? 1. There was supposed to be 3. That's why they invented the SUV. Because we wouldn't take care of our roads, and the people in Oakville knew it was going to be a rough ride. And so Joe has touched on this, but I was once in a debate like this in Washington, D.C., where the planning director for Washington, D.C. started to trash the suburbs. I said, look, honey, the suburbs are there, and they ain't going nowhere. And the people in the suburbs, you like living where you live? He's not sure. Do you like living? I know she likes it because she works with me. People like living in the suburbs. We got to have them. We got to build the roads so they can get there.
So you're a proponent, though, of an idea, I only know this because you mentioned it the other night, that if you live in those burbs in Tuscany, a neighborhood you didn't know where it was, if you live in Tuscany and you want to take the LRT, and you should pay more than, say, if you're in Kensington and you want to take the LRT downtown.
Curious.
Am I quoting you right? Was that your
You're
idea?
absolutely quoting me right. So
And to what end? Why would that be a good idea?
I'll give you the rationale. So I lived in Washington, D.C.
I live in Calgary.
And the Washington, D.C. Metro ran up into my county, and if you live further away, you paid more to get to work. It's only natural. You're using a greater part of the infrastructure. You should pay more than if you're using less of the infrastructure.
Do you agree this would be a controversial idea if you brought it forward in
It'd
Calgary?
be freaking huge.
It'd be huge. All right. How much are you spending on the ring road?
We had this guy, I think it's like $5 billion in total, and
I think it was
2 or 3
5.2 billion. Or
$5 billion.
But there's like 2 or 3 left to complete it, right?
something like that.
How much debate has there been about whether or not we should build a ring road so trucks can drive around the city?
And I got to tell you,
This nice city you're designing in here.
I've heard nothing in the time I've been here. How much debate occurred before I got here, I don't know. But
So doesn't that speak to the core of what we're talking about, is how we make decisions, healthy decisions here about the future of the city? I'm not against either of these plans, I'm just asking.
absolutely, because one would say that that money could be used to complete another transit line, or it could be used to finish the ring road. So at Planning Urban Development Committee the other day, we were dealing with an industrial issue, and one of the industrial representatives happened to mention in a speech to the committee, he was anxious for the ring road to be done because it's important for the industrial land supply, and our rates are the highest in North America. Now, if you actually look at the number of trips that will occur in the ring road over 10 years and divide it by the cost, then you find out the real cost.
You shouldn't build it. And here's why. It's a matter of sunk costs. So you can end up spending $3.2 billion for something that you decided that you didn't need. Or you can end up spending $5.2 billion for something that you decided that you didn't need. So even though you've built 2/3 of it, and you've decided that you don't need it, stop building it now.
You realize the backstory here? We've been fighting 50 years to get the right to build this ring road.
Yeah.
And this is the first real window. I just thought I'd throw that in. Keep going.
Well, there are organizations, and I hate to praise the U.S. military. My friend Doug Bissett is in here somewhere. He's an Army veteran, a U.S. Army veteran. I do not want to praise the U.S. military, but I will praise the Department of Defense in the U.S. for this reason. They'll start to build something. They'll come up with a plan. They'll spend billions of dollars building it. They'll decide that they don't need it, and they'll stop, and it'll be the end of it. It's a hard thing to do. It's a psychological thing that's really tough for us to get our heads around, because you think, well, we've already invested so much time and money into this, we might as well finish it. We're doing the project a disservice by not finishing the project. And I think, again, going back to decision making, what is decision making about? It's about satisfying our objectives. It's about getting us to make choices that are in line with what we want. When we decide that we don't want something, even if it's half done, stop doing it. The money you spend on the ring road is money that you're not going to spend on other stuff that I've heard you guys talk about since I arrived, other really cool stuff. So I would rather save that money for the cool stuff than keep investing it in something that we don't need anymore. Don't hurt me.
So, whoever lives down there will hate what he just said when they're driving up the Deerfoot on Tuesday morning.
Deerfoot wasn't designed for, where's Kylie Vanderpoort? And she told me the other day that the Deerfoot wasn't designed for the amount of traffic that it has on it now. So they shouldn't be on the Deerfoot anyway.
Of course it wasn't. And there's a great article I put in a slide presentation at the Atlanta. Will 23 lanes be enough? Well, of course not. But what happened when I suggested slugging last year? You remember that? Nobody remembers that.
We don't read all your clippings.
I didn't. It wasn't a clipping.
He does.
They ripped me in the newspaper. In Washington, D.C., 25,000 to 45,000 people a day will stand at the Pentagon, a shopping mall. There's a post in the Pentagon. Sluggers line up here. And it's not hitchhiking. You stand there, a car comes up, you jump in, he rides in the HOV lane because there's two people in the car.
Yeah,
That's how they get to
we
work.
did rip you for that. You're right.
See?
Yeah.
That's how they get to work. And of course, now what I was advocating for slugging, of course, everybody was going to be attacked in the cars, robbed. It doesn't happen in Washington. But I'm going to disagree with something that Joe just said. The Department of Defense in the States doesn't always get it right.
No.
How do I know this? Because I worked in a city that was 62 square miles and 5 interstate highways crossed its borders. And this is leading to your point about the ring road. 5 interstate highways crossed the borders of the city of St. Louis. The interstate highway was never supposed to go to the inside of the city. Why was the interstate highway built? Because General Eisenhower was the President of the United States. And in World War II, he blew up all the railways and the airports. And the Germans still got everything all around the country. Why? Because they built the Autobahn system. And that's why they built the interstate highway, and that's why, one of the main reasons why St. Louis hollowed out. Because it was so easy to get out of town. So one of the things we're not doing with the ring road is looking at the impact the ring road has on regional growth. And will it contribute to the things that David says that the Herald can't use the 2 words?
Urban sprawl.
Just in a moment, I'm going to open up to microphones and questions from the floor to get you part of this conversation. So start thinking about what you want to ask. And please phrase it in the form of a question, because I think things will go a lot better if that's what you do.
Is that like Jeopardy?
Exactly like Jeopardy, because if you give them a microphone and you don't, there's real trouble. Trust me, I've been down this road. And if you don't want to get up and ask, there's a Twitter handle over here that you can just send the Twitter message to, and we can read questions online if anybody's watching online. Okay? I just wanted to throw that in there. Go ahead.
What I was going to say was, Roland just mentioned transit, and I teach a class. I teach an early morning class at the U of C. Thank God it's over now, actually. But it was an 8 a.m. class. I would take the train in from my place in Earlton, which I rent, and I'd get up at 5, catch the train at 6, be at school for 6:45, and I happened to bump into a student on my way in, and the student asked me if I took the train to work because she saw me walking in. And she referred to the train, the C train, as the loser cruiser. And this goes back to what I talked about at the beginning. I think that the reason that people are driving in on the Deerfoot, the reason that people want to be in their cars, the reason that people think that they want the ring road is because there's a certain level of freedom and prestige and autonomy and just sort of comfort that goes along with driving in your car, whether you're in it alone or not. And if you go to New York and ride the metro, if you go to Paris and ride the metro, people wouldn't even dream of calling it the loser cruiser. It's one of the most culturally diverse things that you can do in those cities. The Washington metro is no New York subway or Paris metro, but it's far from the loser cruiser. So I think, again, if we want to start sort of shifting our perceptions, we've got to start doing things that address that halo effect I talked about earlier. We need to start accepting the fact that there are other ways to do stuff, there are better ways to do stuff, and there are ways to do stuff that aren't only better, they'll make us feel better. And if they make us feel better, other people will feel better, and that will solve a lot of problems. I don't want to sort of dumb it down to that level, but really, whether or not we are happy with the decisions we make comes down to how we feel. It's emotion. And we don't do enough emotion. We do so much analysis and so much big data and so much numbers. We strip the feeling away. And when we strip the feeling away, I can tell you from experience that none of the stuff we're talking about today is going to work because we won't know how to feel about it.
And the real danger is not Detroit, it's San Francisco. Because we don't want that. How many illegal suites do we have in this town? The number's as high as 45,000 or higher. We can't legalize secondary suites. You know what the problem in San Francisco is? People can't afford to live there. And what's happening in Calgary is, same thing in Toronto, at least they're building so many multi-units, is we run the risk of pricing the people we need in this city out of this city. And if that happens, they're going to have to live further out. And if they have to live further out, they're going to want the ring road, and they're going to want the urban sprawl, because it's the only place they're going to be able to afford to live. And that's what scares the hell out of me. We're going to become San Francisco, priced out of the people we need. Me trying to get employees. We brought in somebody from Fort McMurray, 3 months to find a place to live. I was 3 days from living in my Volvo down by the river. It would have been a nice spot, but if you want to see this city's other side, walk your dog in the dark at 5:30 in the morning tomorrow and watch where the lights are.
You know what? The city, you already can't afford it. I mean, if that's the angle you're going to take, I'm going to be controversial and say that we are San Francisco. I don't want to live in Chestermere. I don't want to live in Bragg Creek. I don't want to live in Canmore. Those are great places. Don't be offended. But I want to live in the inner city. I want to live in Earlton. I want to live in Mission. I want to live in Kensington. In fact, I owned a house. My wife and I owned a house in Kensington. And that's what started this whole mess for me. That's why I'm sitting here. We bought a house. I won't even say how much it was. It was a lot. I couldn't believe the bank gave us the money. We woke up one morning and realized that the house had gone up in a year about 11, 12%, a lot of money. And when we did the math on our mortgage, we would be dead before we owned it. We're already too expensive. That was the moment, coupled with all this Detroit stuff I was getting freaked out about, where we put the house up for sale, and then we thought we were going to rent, and then the whole rental problem came up, but that's another story. So we already are. If you look at cities like London, Paris, Copenhagen, Stockholm, these are cities where people want to be on the inside. It's places where people want to walk to stuff. They want to interact with each other. I love the posters out there about the dog walking and how that makes you a social citizen. I love that. We want that here. And if I feel like I make decent money, I really do. I'm not going to complain about my salary, but I don't want to spend $450,000 for a 630 square foot condo in Mission. That's insane.
But can we have it both ways? Can you be the city that everybody wants to move to and be affordable? I think isn't that just the market operating the way it's supposed to?
Yes and no.
City planner.
Right now, the problem in Alberta is we lack the tools to create the diversity in the housing market. And we need different tools to incentivize that diversity to occur. As for being social when I walk my dog, nobody wants to be around me when I lean over with that bag. But
My dog must have been cuter than yours.
yes, although my dog is a gunshot victim. I have a tough dog.
Or bad aim.
Or bad aim.
Sorry.
You can't miss him. He's a big 95-pound.
Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt. Sorry. It's getting late for me. I get
The challenge in Alberta is, particularly in Calgary, is people, as I said earlier, the market is distorted by the people who control the vast amounts of land. The great thing that's happening in Calgary is new builders are coming in. You know, I've got probably 4 or 6 people coming up from that meeting I had yesterday to try and start to invest in Calgary because the Americans know how to run rental housing. And for some reason, they won't build it here, although it's starting. Until we get that diversity in the market, Calgary will be San Francisco. And we need that diversity, so we need more people here doing that kind of work. So it can happen. We may have to incentivize it, but we don't have those tools. You know, they have rent control in Vancouver. And what does that do? We have rent control in Ontario. Man, it killed us. The only way we got new apartments in Vancouver was a condo would go up, 10 nurses would come over for sick kids, buy 10 units and rent them out. That's starting to happen here, but we need more product on the market. But I'm telling you, we tax the residential high-rise stuff a lot, and it hurts us and subsidizes the lower property values for your taxes on your houses.
I'll put another spin on it, because I think that, you know, there is the tax issue, there's the incentivization issue, there's all of that too. But, and this is just an opinion, but I'm going to say it anyway. Is that okay? I think the reason that the housing market in Calgary is so flaming hot right now is because the people that are buying places in the city are the people who can afford to buy them. When we went to look to buy stuff, we were competing with people who were VPs, execs. They were big deals in some of the big companies downtown. So this brings me back to what freaked me out that led me to write the Detroit piece in the beginning. I think that we're seeing an inflation in the value of homes in the inner city as a result of the fact that the people who are buying them up are the people who can afford them. They can afford them because they're the top dogs and the high rollers in the one industry that runs the town. And again, I'm not trying to be critical of that industry. It's not, you know what, whatever, do your thing. But if that industry takes a turn, and I predict it will, and through no fault of their own, they're not bad people, but I think the world market is going to change. All of a sudden, a house that was worth $1.2 million is going to be worth a whole lot less than $1.2 million. And that's going to happen overnight, and that's the problem.
I don't see anybody chomping at the bit to ask a question. Is there somebody? Whoa, they are. Okay, let's start at the very back if we can, and then we'll move forward. Great. Go ahead. Look, there's a mic. Great.
You have to sing feelings now.
No, okay. I don't like the lights because I feel like I'm being interrogated when the lights are.
Roland, thank you. I've been chomping at the bit all day because we've been harping on we need good design. Well, it's been the same message for over 20 years in the planning sector, and I think most people know it. But we're dealing with structural issues. The financial system is set up to put mortgages in single-family homes. I thought it was working.
Keep talking. We can hear you.
Okay.
Come to a question, though.
What are you going to do about it? How are you going to change the banking system? How are you going to change the taxation system? And how are you going to pay for aging infrastructure in the further suburbs?
Yep. Design schmine. You know, if you do it right, you get good design. That's not what I'm worried about. And we shouldn't just keep talking about design all the time. It's the structure. So here's what's happening. And this may bore you, but this is what's happening. If you read my blog this week and from last week, it's boring. It's about paying for things, value capture. It's boring, but it's reality. It's what you're talking about. We're in discussions with the province about the Municipal Government Act. It's boring, but it's reality. And we want powers that the government needs to give us to pay for the infrastructure, the community centers. There's new community centers in the suburbs. The ones in downtown need some help. And we're starting to have this discussion about how does it do it. Edmonton has a system where the general revenue, they vote every year to invest some of that money in neighborhoods that need to be improved, older neighborhoods. We don't do that. We do it different ways. So we have to rethink about how we collect our tax base. We're looking at how to pay for downtown pedestrian infrastructure, where that gentleman from Tuscany, Mahogany, Spruce, whatever, Birch, where he drives from, and he drives downtown, he creates an externality on Joe or me walking to work. But why isn't the tax base from downtown, and we're 7, 8, 9, which pays for 51% of the property tax in the city of Alberta, or Calgary, why isn't some of that money going back to improve the infrastructure? Okay, so we have to rethink about structurally how we spend, we raise the money, and how we distribute it. That's boring, but that's what gets you good design.
Woman in the... Over there, I can't see you, sorry. There you are. Okay, gotcha now. Yep.
All right. I really enjoyed the conversation you had about infrastructure and sunk costs and sort of the long-term implications of that. So I wanted to relate the discussion about driving in from the suburbs to an economy that fails to diversify from oil and gas. And this question's more directed towards Rollin, how do you figure people who have bought housing in the periphery, who assume they would always be able to afford the cost of commuting, adapt in the event we experience an economic crisis, as Joe has suggested?
She's really smart, by the way.
That's a good
She's
question.
a student at the U of
Good
C.
luck.
Oh, there's no good luck about it. I
She'll
just
mess
lived
you up.
this.
Yeah.
I lived through the recession in the United States in 2008. I know who went bankrupt. It was the immigrants who could only afford houses in the suburbs, who worked 2 or 3 jobs to support their family because they couldn't afford to live closer in, and gas went to $5 a gallon. You want to see your infrastructure improve? Increase the price of gas and use it to pay for your infrastructure. It will put the brakes on suburban sprawl. If you don't believe me, fly into Atlanta and look out the window about 5 miles before you land at the airport. Now, I'm not advocating gas to go to $5, okay? If I'm going to do that, I'll do that. I'll do that in the privacy of my own. Oh, sorry, we're already there. Higher. Do you know in Washington, D.C., when gas went up to $6, $7, all of a sudden there was capacity on the freeways? You know what happened? People realized there was capacity on the freeways and they said, shit, I'm going to drive. I'll pay for the gas, or they'll slug. So there's infrastructure issues that are out of balance in Canada. But there's also good things like no mortgage deduction, no benefit for being married, those kinds of things that drove some of that housing problem in the States. But this goes back to the point we were talking about earlier. The ring road gets completed, what's that going to do to growth on the other side? And will people then decide, well, I can now drive farther away and live farther away where the housing is cheaper? And so, did I answer your question?
No, you didn't.
I thought I did. Hold it, I asked her, did I answer your question?
I'm curious. I mean, some people I find have disproportionately more resources to adapt to that kind of crisis than others, and I guess just from an environmental justice point of view, to say that in the event that there is a crisis, that people will just either drive more or less and live with the consequences says little to the people that are maybe less able to cope with those consequences.
There is no environmental justice in the current real estate market. And we saw it this is what I'm saying, we saw it in the United States. This is why there were so many foreclosures. Now, one of the things we were having a conversation with the council the other day was increasing, when I showed them this chart, I said we need more of this in the suburbs. So Imperial Oil going south, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You get a reverse commute. Walton Lands and north of the airport, building a 3 or 4-story stick-built condo is a good thing. Because a lot of those people may be the people that were doing this morning when I flew in from Vancouver. And they can afford that kind of product. So from an environmental justice standpoint, we've got to convince the home builders who are building on the periphery to diversify so that they become more sustainable and people have choices and they may have shorter commutes.
And wouldn't it be cool if we could build some of that in the city so that lower income people could take advantage of that too, instead of living in the burbs? That's all I'm going to say.
All right, well, okay, you run the show. Over there. Is it good?
Kind of a complex issue, and I realize that the Calgary Board of Education is outside the control of the City of Calgary Council, but I'm wondering what it would take to stop the flow of children from aging buildings to other aging buildings, to allow children from other areas to ride on buses into aging buildings. What would it take for the citizens in a local community, rather than see their school be put out of use, or be the new school for a hub of special education students? What would it take for those citizens in that community to be able to use that space and make it a multi-use space to reinvigorate the community within which that aging school is losing its viability?
Do you want to go? I can
No,
address
that's
that.
for you.
Yeah.
That's your question.
Can I have the PowerPoint, please? So there's this group called the JUCC. Sounded like a Rotary Club, but it's the Joint Use Committee of the Catholic school system, the public school system, and the city. And hold it. Oh, there it is. I got to go back. How do I go back? Right there. And one of the big issues about how we're building is we're building a lot of single-family houses. And they're one-dimensional communities, so that when they first open, you get young people moving in with kids. But in 18 years, they're no longer there. The street I lived in Silver Spring, Maryland, 8 houses sold in my street in 2 years. No kids have been in those houses for 37 years. Everybody was like 80 years old. And all of a sudden people went in and they had kids. But the school had been sold 25 years ago. And now the school system said, oh my God, what are we going to do? And when you look at Calgary in 1986 and 2006, you want to, and you know what this is? This is a population projection. So this is females, this is males in 5-year increments, 0 to 5, 5 to 10, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You want to look like Oprah used to look like. You want to be real wide in the middle because that's your highest tax-paying years. And right now in Calgary, it's like 6 working-age adults to every senior. But look what's happening. We're starting to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, real thick at the top. And what's going to happen in 20 years is the population is going to flip. We're going to have a lot of people like me are going to be old and not enough people paying all the bills. So those schools that got closed and they've been sold, you can't get them back. And so right now what's happening, by the way, this is really funny. American gentrifier, 10 violent crimes you can live with. Local delis now selling brie. The point is, Calgary is gentrifying, it's a very young city, but we're gentrifying enormously fast. And I have a graphic here, but I won't show it. When you look at the housing needs, not just the school needs, it's dramatically shifting to the seniors market, and we're not building it. And with the school problem, what happens is, we're about to get 21 new schools in Calgary to be open by 2016, and 9 others renovated, and it costs a lot of money, but those new schools aren't in the established neighborhood because there's no land for them, and right now there's no demand for them. They're all in the green fields. So those schools got sold, but we had, really quick, we just did one, and somebody will help me, that turned over to the arts group in the south part of the city, and it's more community-oriented. So we do it on an individual basis as the schools decide to dispose of the schools.
Can I try and answer that too? It's not going to address your school question directly, but I'm working on a project up in the Northwest Territories now with the government of the NWT and Yellowknife. And they've run into a similar problem where they're trying to figure out how organizations, projects, initiatives got short shrift in the past can be sort of pumped up in the future. And the suggestion that we've made to them is to take your budgeting process and begin, because all the money is coming from one place, and all the different departments get around and sit around and talk about how that money is going to be split up, to come up with some really good alternatives that address a wide range of objectives about social equity, about education, about healthcare, about well-being, about the environment, and put them all on equal footing, because as much as I hate to say it, it's a zero-sum game. The money that you're going to spend on the school is money that you're not going to spend on something else. So put everything on equal footing and have a serious conversation about the trade-offs of putting money into that versus into that. And then maybe we can start to at least kind of get the thin end of the wedge in terms of creating some traction on the issue that you talked about. But if it's going to be everyone has to put their hand up and fight for their scrap, you know, there are going to be some weak links, and they're the ones who are going to lose out. And I hate to say it, but I think when it comes to sort of blight and old schools, it's not going to be easy for them.
And I'll give you one example. If you go to Kensington by the train station where they brought in the portable, or not portables, the containers. Have you seen that? And they're turning it into a community use. I'm researching pop-up schools. I've come up with this term, pop-up schools. What if we just had like buildings that you could move them in for a while and then move them out?
Like a food truck?
Not quite like a food truck. And you could also do it for community buildings. And they go in for a little while, then they move as the demand changes. We got a lot of parks here. You know, and to Joe's point, you got to think about how you use that space.
All right, it's Friday and it's getting late. I'm going to allow one more question, then we're going to wrap up. So the question is going to be over here. Sorry, I can't see you in the light, but this.
So we've seen a lot of good posters today and a lot of very smart speakers. And it seems we don't have a knowledge problem. It seems like we know how to build a sustainable city. Yet when I drive out of the city to the suburbs, each neighborhood after each neighborhood gets uglier, uglier, and uglier. And we keep doing the same thing. What will you do to stop that sprawl of those inefficient, ugly neighborhoods?
Can I go first this time?
Yeah,
You always
go ahead.
go first. I'm sick of it. I'm going to address your point in a couple of different ways. The first way I'm going to address it is something that I was hoping that I could say today. You said we had a lot of smart people in the room, and I'm sorry, there's a light shining in my eye, so I can kind of make you out. There's this misconception about decision making that if you get a bunch of really smart people together with some really good information, they're going to make really good choices. And the reality is that none of that is true. decision quality, our ability to make good choices, high quality choices, is unrelated to our level of intelligence and our level of sort of education or information that we can obtain. That's not to say that being smart and having information aren't bad things. Of course they're good things. But we're hardwired to make choices in certain ways. We're pattern matchers. We like to do things that we've done before. We like to do things that feel right. We like to do things that are salient because we just heard about them. So what you're talking about, I don't want to go down the road of what's ugly and what's not ugly, because I think beauty's in the eye of the beholder. But I think we're stuck in a pattern of kind of what we call heuristic or rule-based decision making, where we do things the same way over and over and over again because that's the way we did them in the past. And the first lesson I teach my students on decision making is, if you want to break that cycle, you have to know what the problem is. And the problem isn't intelligence, and the problem isn't information. It's kind of how our brains are hooked up. If you can understand how we make choices and where we go off the rails and where we routinely go off the rails, then you can begin to structure decision-making processes in such a way that we begin to address that question and Kylie's question and your question. But until then, we're doomed to sort of repeat the same mistakes over and over again. So it's not an intelligence issue. It's not people not meaning well. It's not people not working hard. It's just people not recognizing that what they're doing isn't working because their brains aren't wired to recognize it.
So, video here?
Oh, come on, really?
Yeah, it's a good one. Oh, here it is. So I'll just end it there. Okay. It's a great video. It also gets me into a lot of trouble every time I do it because Jason Marcasaw says I'm doing it. There are a lot of smart people here. There's also a lot of money here. And if you talk to some of the people in this room where they live, they actually like living where they live. They don't mind driving the SUV with the kids in it to whatever they have to do. But what we're finding now is that as that suburb ages, there's people in them, like seniors, that are having troubles. And some of the new council members are saying, what can we do for our seniors in the suburbs? And they're beginning to realize the challenges that have been experienced in so many other older cities. That kind of information will help lead us to change. But at the end of the day, it's about investment. By private investment, it's about investment by the city. And as the bills come due, as profits are made, how can we shape that differently? So I can tell you that the dialogue changed in my last job in a place very much like Calgary because of this chart. And we started to get smarter suburbs because we were running out of land, which we are doing. We've got to, not short term, in the long term as we build out the city. But things are happening that help us change this dialogue. We have a council that's starting to have these conversations. We have people like you that are getting involved. We have bloggers at the university. I'd like to see the blogging community help us change that discussion because the print media isn't doing it.
And I would like to see, I would like to see organizations with the capacity to affect change, like the city, like the big players in industry, begin to build capacity in-house in terms of improving the quality of their decision-making processes. And that's not to say that they don't mean well, but I think that if you look at a few key organizations around the world, people are realizing that decision-making is something that you really have to invest in, like your R&D and other dimensions, and they're creating offices that are focused on decision-making. I know that BC Hydro isn't terribly popular in BC all of the time, but they have built in-house capacity in decision-making. At least they're recognizing that they need to do that. I think we need to do that too.
So I'm just going to jump in with the last question if I can, and it's going to be for Roland. Warning, the last time I asked a question like this, the mayor got hit with a slap order and can't talk about it anymore. So let me ask you.
Does this have a laser thing on it?
It's pretty straightforward. I'm always impressed with your charts and with your depth of knowledge and the ideas that you bring forward, but I'm also aware of the frustrations that you've had in trying to bring about change with your ideas in the city. So, are you the right guy to work with the industry that exists in this town and the developers that exist in this town to bring about all these wonderful, healthy changes that people have been talking about all day here?
So we're already bringing about these wonderful, healthy changes in the established communities. Already am. Joe's point about how we think. We spent $1.3 million last year bringing up a firm out of Washington who did this with the World Bank in Somalia. And we're thinking differently. And we're going to spread that knowledge into the communities. However, it isn't reaching everywhere. We do have trouble in some segments. The good thing is that the folks who've owned the land for a long time in the city are beginning to diversify. There's Brookfield Urban. They had a representative here earlier. They're doing amazing stuff, but they're still getting appealed to the subdivision appeal board, and we're not getting the amazing stuff we thought we were going to get because somebody complained in the inner city. So we're still got that problem. But these companies are starting to diversify. Homes by Avi. You know, his dad took out the ad against me. The son's trying to do inner city development. So we're starting to get these companies to diversify, and really good is we're getting firms from, you know, I live in a new Bucci development. He's from Vancouver. Minto just came in. They're hoping to start to build 500 units of infill housing on small sites starting next year. And then these folks I was talking to yesterday want to come here and bring in new ideas. It will change. But there is still a market for the stuff you asked about. Our key there is to convince some political sides and some builders to change the model. And the school board is helping us with that discussion. As is Councillor Pootman's asked me today, how can we get not just single-family communities? We've got to diversify. And it is happening, but you can't turn the Titanic around in 10 feet.
Joe Harvey, Roland Stanley, thank you for being such a great audience.